Welcome to JonGetsGames. Today I'll be reviewing Nations the Dice game. As the name implies, this is a dice-based distillation of the much larger original Nations game that plays in about a quarter of that time. In this game, you'll be rolling an ever-growing pile of dice as you try to upgrade your buildings, build wonders, and ultimately get the most victory points you possibly can. First I'll go over the rules, and then I'll jump into my review. Here's the starting setup for a 3-player version of Nations the Dice game. In a 4-player version, we would simply add 3 more tiles into this offer here. Each person gets their own player board in front of them, as well as 5 white dice and these 2 starting chits, which you can see on the player board here. And then we randomly decide player order, so let's say that Greece here is going first, and then Rome is going second, and Egypt is going third. As you can see on this book track up here, the starting player gets 1 book, and then second player gets 2, and then so on. To begin the game, the starting player is going to take all of their dice, and they're going to roll them. And now that player takes a single action. There are only 5 different dice faces in the game, and it looks like they managed to roll all of them. There are only 3 different actions in the entire game. The first of these is to purchase a tile from this offer up here. We see there are 9 available. In the left-hand side, we have a 1x, 2x, and 3x, and you'll also see that each tile itself has either a gold symbol on it or a little sword. To make the purchase, you simply spend resources equal to whatever the cost of that tile happens to be. So we see that conquering Babylonia here costs 1 sword, or getting these war elephants here costs 2 gold. In this instance, we only have a single tile in the whole offer that has swords in it, so perhaps the Greece player would spend their single die with a sword token on it, they put it onto their player board, and then they could take Babylonia. They essentially conquer it. They put it into their kingdom, green tiles go off to the side, and then they get to take a new token from the bank equal to the bonus that's on the bottom. So the Greece player gets another money token that they get to use later in this turn. But for now, the yellow Greece player is done. The red Roman player will roll their dice and take an action, etc. around the table until we get back to Greece. And now the Greece player would take another action, and then it would keep going around the table, each player taking a single action. Once a player is done, they can't do any more actions. They simply tilt their card to the side to show that they've passed. So now I'm going to explain the various different tiles in the game. So here we have a leader tile. They're kind of orange. This is Hatfetsup. We put it on our little board here, and we see that it gets us a new reroll chit, which we take from the bank and we put into our player area. Of course, that leader would have cost 1 gold. You could also spend a single gold in this instance to get this wonder, which we put here. We don't actually have it yet. We have to build it, but I'll get to that in a minute. And the last type of tile are these blue buildings. So let's say they purchased this synagogue here. We see that costs 2 gold to do, but now you put the synagogue down on one of the previous blue buildings that we have here. So for instance, we could replace this Axeman. Of course, this is just a thematic difference. All of these starting 5 tiles are just giving you 1 white die. So when you replace a tile, you need to get rid of the bonus that that tile gave you. So this Axeman here had a single white die in there. We have to take a white die and give it back to the bank. And notice you are allowed to get rid of dice that you've already used. If you needed to, you could get rid of a dice that you hadn't used yet, but that's a lot less good. But the bonus of the synagogue is we get a yellow die now from the bank. We get to roll it and use that die result later on in this turn. As you can see, there are 4 different colored dice in the game, and over on the left you'll see the distributions of the die faces on them. So the white dice is kind of normal, the golden die is very good at getting you gold, the blue die is great at books and building things, and the red die is great at fighting. Now that we've covered all the different ways you can buy tiles, let's talk about the other 2 actions you can do on your turn. The second option is build a wonder, and in this case you need to have a wonder already on your player sheet that you've drafted from the player board, and you simply need to spend rock equal to the bottom left portion of that wonder. So in this case you could spend 1 rock, which we have out here, and now the Hanging Gardens is completed. We put it over to the side, and we once again take a token, which is bonus. This is a little food token, and we're going to get 1 victory point at the end of the game. So this food token would go into our usable supply. The third and final action option you can do in your turn is to exhaust one of your reroll chits. You put it onto your board, and then reroll as many dice from your collection as you like. For instance, I might reroll this gold die because I know that it has double and triple gold faces, which are way better, and I might reroll this food die because I now have some permanent food over here. So you roll them up, and then that is your entire action, and it's the next player's turn. So now let's talk more about these little chips over here. We know that the reroll chip is going to let us reroll our dice, and that's great, but we also have these money chips over here, and you can spend these to purchase tiles that are out here. For instance, you can spend these 2 money chips to your player board in order to take this war elephant here and put it onto your board. You're going to get all of your chips that you use on each turn back on the following turn of the game in the second age, third age, and fourth age, so you may as well use them. In this case, we would have gotten rid of this die here and rolled a red die. And the last thing to note is that you can always spend 2 dice of any face value in order to generate a single gold, rock, or food, so this lets you mitigate bad luck to a certain extent. Once every player has passed, we then move beyond the action phase of a turn and move into the book scoring phase. At this point, each player generates books equal to the number of books that they have available via dice with the book face or chits that have a book icon on them. So in this case, the yellow player gets a single book, so they would go up once on the track. Once everybody has generated all their books, we then score them, and this is quite simple. Each player generates victory points equal to the number of people who have less books than them. So the green player right now would get 2 points because there are 2 people with less books, and then the yellow and red player would both get 0 points because there is nobody behind them who has less books than they do. And now we check for famine. We see this tile right here. It was randomly drawn from a stack of 3 for each age, and each player who has at least 1 food is going to generate 1 victory point. It doesn't matter if you have multiple times of this, the maximum you can generate is just the single, so the yellow player has a single food, they would get a victory point from that. Now we determine player order. We look to see how many swords each player has left, and the player with the most swords is going to be the starting player for the next round. The person with the second most swords is going to be the second player, and so on and so on. If there is a tie for swords, then the prior player order between those 2 players is kept. So now we check for war, which is the bottom part of this tile here. So each player who has at least 2 swords is going to get another victory point. Once again, having multiples of this is not going to generate more victory points, so the yellow player would get another victory point for their 2 swords. At this point, the first turn is over, and we need to reset for the second turn. We get a Age 2 War and Famine tile, and then 9 randomly decided Age 2 tiles. And lastly, each player refreshes their boards. All of their chits become active once again, and all of their dice are going to be pulled off to the side to get rolled. As you can see, the Age 2 tiles are better. Instead of giving a single die for the blue buildings, you're going to get a colored dice and then a new white die, which you'll get to roll, which is nice. It's also important to note, you might have noticed already, that even though this is a long ships and this is a knight, they give you the exact same bonus. There's lots of duplicates with these blue buildings. All of the wonders also cost more ore now, and if a leader had come out, you'd see they'd give you 2 reroll chips instead of 1 from the first age. And at this point, the starting player rolls their dice and takes an action, and we just keep going around the table until everybody passes once again. At this point, I think I'm going to fast forward and show you some Age 3 tiles and then Age 4 tiles to give you some idea of what they are. As you can see, the Age 3 blue buildings now offer you 2 of the good dice instead of 1 good die and a white die, but there's still lots of duplicates. The wonders get more expensive, and the leaders still give you 2 reroll chips, but they now give you victory points at the end of the game. And finally, for the Age 4 tiles, you may notice right away that there are no engine building bonuses anymore. Every tile is just victory points. So each blue tile is always just a single victory point. So when you put it over here, you're going to get rid of dice, but dice don't give you points at the end of the game. This leaders just give you extra points versus the Age 3 leaders. And then finally, all the wonders are just lots of points for quite a bit of ore. Once all players have passed in the 4th age, we end the game and we do our endgame scoring, which is quite simple. You just add up all the victory points that are on your various tiles down here. So you have 1, 2, plus 7 is 9, 10, 11, 12 here, and you add that to your points that you already had. In this instance, we would have 14 as an endgame score. Of course, this is not very representative because I fast forwarded, but that's the way you can see all the points you get at the end of the game. These chits right here and these dice, they do nothing. And the person with the most victory points wins. If there's a tie, then the current player order from the end of the last turn is going to break that tie. For my review of Nations of the Dice game, I'm going to be covering a variety of subjects. You can see them over here. I'll be starting at the top and working my way down to the bottom, so let's start with the positives. And the first of these really is the central idea for the whole game, and that is building a dice engine, just getting a small pile of dice into a really big pile of dice throughout the way you play the game. And it does a pretty good job of that. You start the game with those 4 basic white dice, and right from the get-go you start getting rid of those and turning them into blue, white, yellow dice. Once you hit the 2nd age, you start getting multiple dice back, and the 3rd age you get lots of colored dice, so at the end of the game, you usually have twice as many dice going for you as you did at the beginning. Well, as you go into the 4th age anyway. In the 4th age, you get rid of tons of dice as you just try to make victory points out of those blue buildings. But either way, I really enjoy that process of starting with a small basic dice set and kind of customizing your own variety of dice. You might have a lot more blue dice than another player does, and they might have a lot more red dice, and that's going to kind of affect the way you're going to play that individual game. Option number 2 is that I really like the simple turn order structure, where you simply take one action from only 3 options, and then it's the next person's turn, and it just bounces around, and you keep doing that until you run out of things to do. This is a good way of keeping downtime pretty low because you're not doing a whole subset of things on your turn. Oftentimes, your whole action is, I'm going to reroll, and that's your whole turn, and it comes back around to you, and you can think about the things you're trying to do there. It has a really good way of making that fear of missing out with grabbing the tiles from the general tableau. You know, you want to get in there early with the first couple actions and grab those really juicy tiles before anybody else gets there, and then maybe you do more maintenance type things like building wonders and, well, re-rolling when you only have a couple dice left to try and squeeze a little bit more stuff out. I like the way that all comes together, and it really keeps the game rolling. My first neutral point has to do with the extreme difference in interestingness that the various die faces have. You go from swords, which can win you wars, they can get you territories, which give you different bonuses, they also affect turn order, all the way to the other end where you have food, which pretty much is terrible all the time from an interesting gameplay perspective. Sure, pretty much everything that you do is going to generate you a point or two here and there, but that's literally all that food does. You just want enough food to satisfy the famine, and you get that many points, and it's boring because you're not even doing anything. With gold, you might say, well, you only do one thing with gold, you just buy those tiles, but at least you're deciding between the tiles and which one's going to make the most sense for what you have going on. There are decisions there, whereas food is just completely decisionless. I think that books are also pretty boring in this game, specifically in the 2-player game. In a 4-player game, you can get quite a bit of points, and there are some decisions to be made there, but in a 2-player game, with the person leading books only getting 2 points per round, I know that that can add up, but in general, it just feels so much less interesting than building wonders and taking territories and all that kind of stuff. So I really wish that the food and books, specifically the food, had been given more reason to even be in the game. My second neutral point, I will admit, is a bit silly, but I find the setup and takedown of the game to be somewhat annoying. There is just tons of stuff that you're putting out on the table, sorting into different little stacks and flipping over just to start the game, and then you play the game and you take it all down, and it seems like the amount of time you spent playing, especially for a 2-player game, is about the same amount of time as the setup and teardown was combined. So half of your time for that whole segment was just sorting tiles out, which I don't really enjoy. Now, I own lots of games that have much longer setups than Nations of the Dice game does, but the fact that the game is so light and quick just makes it feel kind of off. I feel like if I'm playing a 15 to 20 minute game, I want the setup to be just a minute or 2 tops, so you can just jump right in, play it, and then jump right back out again. And now for my one negative, which unfortunately casts a shadow over everything I've already talked about, and that is that there is an astonishing lack of variety in the tiles that come in the game. When you sit down for the first time to play and you see all these big stacks of tiles and you put some of them out and you realize there's a bunch you didn't even see, you might be thinking, oh cool, next time I play, I want to know what those tiles are, we'll see what they are, and it'll change up this gaming experience. But as you start to play, you realize that in the first 3 ages, there are only 3 different types of blue buildings. You might lay them out and have 3 buildings that all just give you a blue die. They have different art and they have different names, but they're functionally identical. Then you notice that all the advisors are the same within each age, and that the 2nd age and 3rd age advisors are almost identical, but the 3rd age gives you just a victory point versus the 2nd age. They all give you just 2 rerolls, and that's not very interesting. And finally, you get to the 4th age, and you're shocked to find that every single blue building is identical, and they're boring as well. You have to get rid of these dice to place them down, and they give you a victory point. Now, I know you need victory points to win the game, but that is such an uninteresting way to go about winning the game that I was genuinely surprised. Ultimately, I feel like this game needed more variety, like the territories and the wonders that are in here. The wonders and territories are all somewhat different from each other. They're not crazy different, but enough to make it feel like these 2 territories on the board, you can think about which one you go for, versus the blue buildings, which is just, I obviously go for the cheaper thing that does the exact same thing as the more expensive one does. And in the end, I just can't get over the missed opportunity that this game provided to have way more interesting tiles. So now let's go over replayability, and after that negative, it should be obvious that I think that Nations the Dice game has a replayability problem. This is probably going to be pretty quick because I simply think that there isn't enough variety with those tiles, and after playing it 4 times, I could see myself not playing it again until a potential expansion comes out, and only if that expansion was specifically targeted at fixing the variety of tiles problem. If that happens, I could see myself getting it down and playing it a bunch more, but as it stands right now, it's not really going to get played much. So now let's cover the various player counts. Nations of the Dice game plays 1 to 4 players, and I don't normally talk about these solo versions of games because I don't really like solo board gaming, but I did give it a shot and it worked, it was okay. But realistically to me, this is a 2 to 4 player game, and honestly, I tried all of those and they all work. The only real difference between them is that, well, first of all, the 4-player game is longer, just there's more rounds around the table, but specifically the 3-player game has the same number of tiles as the 2-player game, but there's a 3rd player, so you're gonna have less tiles in your tableau because you're just fighting a lot more for it, and I think that is a bit of a detractor because the thing that this game has going for it is building up that engine, getting lots of tiles, and getting a big dice pool. So I think in general, I would prefer to play the 2 or 4-player version. Honestly, probably the 4-player version because it would make it feel like a slightly more fleshed out, bigger game, and you just get more tile options. And when you have variety issues, having more options to choose from is a slight fix to that. In conclusion, I really want to love Nations the Dice game, but ultimately I can't get over that lack of tile diversity and honestly how quickly the game goes. I feel like it was a game that looks like it was designed to be 45 minutes long, but then had all of this awesome good stuff ripped out of it so that it would actually only play in like 20 minutes. And that is a bad thing to me. I really wanted what the game could have been. I wanted that 45-minute version of Nations the Dice game instead of this super quick, way too streamlined version. Ultimately, I am going to play Roll for the Galaxy pretty much every time I want to sit down and play a good dice-based engine-building game. And if I want to play a 20-minute dice game, well, I've got tons of those. And I'll get one of those out and play that instead. I feel like it's showing something that it actually isn't, and I am quite disappointed by that. Ultimately, if a expansion comes out, I will be quite interested in it, I'll look into it, and I will probably grab it if it seems to give more variety to those tiles and flesh it out into a longer game that I feel like it was meant to be. But if that doesn't happen, then I don't see this one sticking on my shelf very long. If you'd like to see more in-depth game reviews like this one, as well as full game playthroughs and vlogs, please subscribe to my channel. Also, if you'd like to become more involved with the channel, you can directly support it at patreon.com/JonGetsGames. Thanks for watching.